Hey everybody, I'm here with Emma McAdam today as my special guest. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist, and her mission is to make mental health skills easy to understand through YouTube videos and online courses. Her YouTube channel is Therapy in a Nutshell, and she has nearly 400,000 subscribers on that channel, in large part because her videos are so easy to understand and they're packed with tons of valuable information, but also because she has the most soothing voice I think I have ever heard. Emma gets bonus points because she is an Aggie. She graduated from Utah State University, and that's where my parents met and fell in love, and probably where I was conceived. So I feel a special connection with Emma, and I'm really glad to have her on the show today. And we're going to talk about something really special today, which is how to get the most out of your marriage, how to make things go right. So I'm going to kick it over to the little introduction, and then I'm going to bring Emma on here. Emma, thank you for
Hi.
being here.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
You probably don't feel this way about yourself, but you're a legend in your own right. You're a little bit of an internet celebrity, especially in the
Oh
mental health
no.
space. So I'm really grateful that you took a little bit of time out of your crazy schedule. You've got three kids,
Yep.
three
6-year-old,
kids, a
4-year-old,
career, a
and a
busy life,
2-year-old.
and you're here hanging out
Mhm.
with us. So thank you.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah. So I want to talk to you a little today about how to help things go right in marriage. And I know you are an expert on the psychology, how the brain works. And I want to kick things off by asking you kind of a simple question. And it's how does our brain work against us in our relationships?
That's a good question because I think a lot of us don't realize that our brain's default mode is to keep us alive. So if you think about our ancestors, maybe a couple thousand years ago, they were worried about things like threats, like tigers eating them or running out of food, or an attack from a neighboring tribe. So they were constantly scanning their environment for threats, and that helped protect them in a very physical way, kept them safe. And our brain is just really good at scanning our environment for threats. So our default mode is to pay a lot more attention to things that seem awful or seem dangerous than to pay attention to things that are actually going really well. So, like if you watched the news today, the news channels kind of take advantage of this, right? They know that people are going to turn their head and look when they play a scary story or a scary headline. But the truth is, the world is actually, there's less war than there's ever been, there's less famine than there's ever been. Income inequality is better than it has been in the history of the world. There's less slavery, there's less, but they don't play these stories because our brain is not default mode wired to look at what's going right.
Right. So as human beings, we have a tendency to skew or have a negative bias in how we perceive the world. So how does that
Yep.
impact our relationships directly?
Yep. So the natural way our brain works is in a relationship, we're going to be scanning the background for threats all the time. And a threat could look like something like, oh, my husband's not taking out the trash. And then your brain's going to interpret that as like, maybe he doesn't care about me. Maybe he's insensitive. Maybe this, maybe that. And it's going to put a lot more emotional weight on those little negative things than it is on the little positive things. Like, oh, my husband held my hand today. Oh, my husband helped with the kids today. Oh, my husband cooked me breakfast today. Like all of those are like the same level of like intensity in real life as like not taking out the trash, but emotionally, the one thing they do wrong is going to feel maybe 5 times as intense as the nice little things that they do throughout the day. So we're naturally going to be really good at noticing what's not going well.
Yeah, I call this horribleizing. Like
Yes.
we focus on the negative thing and then we blow it out of proportion over time, and we never
Hmm.
contrast it with all of the good things that are going on in life. When it's obviously never is kind of an extreme word, but we have that tendency, I
Sure.
think, to slip into that space.
Yeah, I
Um,
think we have to realize that our natural default mode is to notice the bad, and that if we want things to go well, we have to put into place simple routines and rituals that help counterbalance that, because otherwise we'll just notice what's not going right. Right.
mm. Okay, let's talk about that a little bit. So, if we've got people who are listening or watching who can relate to this experience of, man, I see. Maybe we should actually dive into some examples first. You know, you mentioned the garbage and stuff like that, but what does it look like in a relationship to be kind of consumed with that negative slant, that negative perspective? I call it the poop colored glasses.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great term. I like that. I think one of the first things you might notice yourself doing, I catch myself doing this sometimes, is like making lists. Like making a list of like, well, my husband didn't do this, or my wife didn't do this, or like bringing to mind the things that bother you. I actually heard a story of a woman who was sitting in church and writing a list in her phone of
Mm,
all the things her husband was doing that bugged her. And that is something we do to kind of protect ourselves. Like if we're afraid we're at risk, it's easy to start compiling a list of why we're the good ones and the other person is the bad one or something like that. And then, in addition to that, it just kind of primes our brain to be more sensitive to noticing more threats in the future. And when I say threats, I mean like a lot of people don't realize like social anxiety is really about a survival threat. Like our brain perceives rejection as a threat to our physical safety. Our ancient ancestors depended on their village for food, for water, for protection, for their community, for their wheat harvest, whatever. And so being rejected from your village presented a physical survival threat. So when we get into fear mode, or we get into like I'm going to notice what's the matter, we don't really realize it, but our brain almost shifts to this like anxiety fear place. And for some people that does look like, I feel insecure in a relationship, but for other people this looks like self-protection, like anger, resentment, blame, um, and just overall feeling like life's not fair because of how I'm being treated.
So it sounds to me like a lot of this is an anxiety response. So people who are worriers, people who are, I mean, we're all worriers. We're all anxious. It's part of our human instincts. Um,
Yeah.
but this kind of this thing that works against us, the way our brain works against us, is it turns us into excessive worriers.
hmm Yeah, I mean, at its very root, it's the fear response. It's the fear that, like, I'm not safe, I'm insecure, I'm in danger. And that fear response, I mean, there's a direct counterbalance to that, which is the attachment and the love response. But I think it's so easy to slip into that default kind of, yeah, anxiety and fear response. It's so easy to notice what's going wrong and feel like it's someone else's fault when in reality it's just a lot of times it's just our brain being kind of sensitive, like kind of anxious. Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to talk about that because I think when we fall in love, part of the reason that we fall in love is we do feel safe, we do feel
Yeah.
secure, and we find somebody who makes us feel understood. They make us feel
hmm
accepted by the tribe. They kind
mm
of it calms all of those natural fear instincts down. So what is it
Yep.
about a relationship or marriage that has us go into it feeling safe and secure, and then all of a sudden start looking at our partner as a threat? Why does that happen?
That's such a great question. Pardon me. I'm not sure. I don't quite know. All I know is that marriage is like really hard. Like I look at myself, I've been married 8 years. I had tons of skills and training and education and experience before I got married. And I'm still like constantly amazed. Like it's so easy to go there. I don't know. What do you think, Nate? Like why do you think we shift into that place of like, I hate everything, or whatever?
Yeah, yeah. Man, I think a large part of it is because when you do find that person, you start to let down your guard, you take off your armor,
Yeah.
and you allow yourself to be susceptible to being hurt for the first
Yeah.
time maybe in a very long time, or more susceptible, more vulnerable with anybody than
Yeah.
we've ever been in our entire lives. And I think that vulnerability allows us for a really deep and intimate connection, but it can kind of hit that worry button in the back of our mind that goes, "Oh, your armor's off, you can get hurt." And so we kind
Yeah.
of go on, we realize that because we've taken off this armor, all of a sudden we go on high alert, and it's like, oh, but you could also really hurt me, and I want to have you close, but I want to keep you at a distance so that we can be connected, but also I can be safe at the same time. And I
Yeah.
think one of the trickiest things, Esther Perel has said this multiple times, And I love it. But she says, in order for you to have a fulfilling relationship, it requires you to meet two opposing needs at the same time. And two of those opposing needs are like safety and security and vulnerability and connection. And sometimes we want our independence, and sometimes we want some closeness. Sometimes we want, there's like constant demands on both sides of this pendulum, and it's
Yeah.
impossible to meet both of those demands at the same time. So we kind of swing back and forth, I think. So we want our individuality, but we also want our closeness and our connection with our partner. We want to feel
Yeah.
safe and secure, but we also want to feel vulnerable and connected, and we just can't have all of those things at once.
Yeah, like being really connected and caring so much about what my husband thinks and caring so much about my husband leaves me wide open to being hurt when something maybe doesn't go the exact way I want to, which is normal with two human beings who are completely fallible, myself being one of those, right?
Right. But
Yeah,
sometimes we feel like
yeah,
we're just a little bit less fallible than our partner, and so we're a little
that's
more in
right.
that realm. So
That's easy, yeah.
let's talk a little bit about what, now that we've kind of established that our brain's working against us. We have this primal fear in our brains that's trying to protect us from danger, keep us safe, and sometimes that means we're putting up our dukes and putting on armor around our partner, and that
Yeah.
totally impedes our ability to stay connected. So what are some things that we can do to fight off that instinct to kind of lean more, to put on those poop colored glasses and lean more into the negative?
Yeah, yeah. It's a good question, and I think it doesn't get asked enough because I think a lot of times in marriage and in marriage therapy, I'm a marriage therapist, we focus on what's going wrong and we try to fix that. So we might say, oh, we don't communicate well. We're going to focus on our communication. And, sometimes that just makes things feel worse. And another thing that, a lot of people do is I mean, there's study out there showing that people don't go to therapy until they're on the verge of divorce. Like maybe they've been having some difficulties in their marriage for 5 or 7 years before they even think about starting therapy. So it's this problem-centered approach. It's like, well, things are fine. I'm not going to really put in any effort unless something goes wrong, and then I'm going to put tons of attention on that. And the way our brains work is what we pay attention to, we get more of. Like if we pay attention only to problems, we get more of them. So I think it's important to take kind of a solution focused approach. Like, how do we help things go right in our marriage instead of just, oh, I'm going to wait till
What's
something
going
goes
wrong?
wrong and then I'm going to focus on that.
Yeah, so you mentioned something that perked up my ears because I have conversations like this almost every single day with people. And the
Yeah.
number one phrase that I hear from people when they're struggling in their marriage is we need to work on our communication. So why
Yeah.
does taking that approach oftentimes work against couples? If they feel like they're not feeling seen or heard, they feel like they're disconnected, they feel like they're not communicating well, why would working on communication actually disrupt their marriage more?
Yeah, I think when people work on communication, they think there's like a set of skills. Like if they say something right, or if they use the right skill, that's going to make it so their other person understands what they're saying. It's more about talking than it is about receiving. But I think underneath skills is this sense of, am I safe or am I not safe? And so if I come to my husband and say, hey, we need to work on our communication, even though I'm saying, let's work on this skill, what he's hearing is a threat, right? This safety or not safety mode. And so then we have to work kind of past that barrier. And I think for a lot of women, this is a generalization, but a lot of
That's okay.
women are more they have a better physiological tolerance to stress and talking about stressful situations
Yep.
than men do. So men's heart rates and blood pressure goes like way higher when talking about a stressful situation than a woman's does. And so a man might perceive that. And this is generalized. So there's some men who are really
But
great at
there's
talking and
research
some
to
women
back it
who
up.
aren't.
There's
Yeah.
like
But
I
there's
don't want
research.
to.
Yeah, like
I
I'm
just want to
talking.
back
Yeah,
you up here. This is not like
yeah,
this is not you shooting from the hip. This is
that's right.
backed by research that men have a lower tolerance for emotional discomfort.
Yeah, and we're specifically referencing John Gottman's Love
Yep.
Lab, where they wired people up to like if you want to look that up, go look up flooding on John Gottman's website. Like
Yep.
you can see the research on this. But it feels like a threat when we talk about that. And then the other, so okay, so problem number one is when we focus on communication skills, it can feel threatening. And what's more important than any of our skills is underneath that is our sense of attachment and our sense of safety and our sense of security. So we have to first focus on that sense of safety and security, and we don't create a sense of safety by focusing on problems. The second thing is like skills are not as effective. Uh, um, Skills are helpful. That's what I teach on my YouTube channel.
Right.
It's all skills. I don't
Yeah.
do therapy on my YouTube channel. I do skills. I love skills. But you can't solve an underlying problem with skills alone. Like there has to be a change of heart, and that's a very vague term. Um, but I'm a big believer in way of being, and that also references kind of Arbinger Institute work, the
Yes.
anatomy
Love
of
Arbinger
peace.
Institute.
Yeah, anatomy of peace and leadership and self-deception. So like we can change our way of being towards someone, and that's going to invite forward progress. But if we just focus on communication skills, then we can use those communication skills if we're in a hateful state of heart to bludgeon someone else or to justify ourselves in being, well, at least I'm working on communication skills, but my husband can't communicate, right? Like
Right.
that's never gonna be solution focused. That was a
Yeah, I
long
think I
answer.
think a lot of people in every partnership, there's always a high desire and a low desire partner. And when I say that, people will almost instantly think of sex, but I'm talking about everything. There's a high desire partner for keeping to the budget and a low desire partner.
Yeah.
There's a person who has a higher desire for having a clean house and a partner who has a lower desire. It's very rare that you have a matched desire across the board. And one of those things that I notice a lot is that there's always one person who's more invested in trying to make the relationship work. There's one person who cares more about trying to fix things and improve things and brings up the issues and wanting to make them better. In my relationship, I'm the higher desire partner in that regard. My wife is
Yeah.
totally on board. If I say, hey, I scheduled a therapy appointment, or hey, we're going to go to this workshop, she's like, I'm there, but I'm the more proactive one. And
Yeah.
when I talk to the high desire partner in a lot of cases, it's interesting how often the high desire partner, when it comes to fixing your relationship or improving your relationship, uses their desire as kind of a one-up weapon to put their partner down
Yeah.
and look at them as being less than or inferior or broken in some way. So they absolutely can
Mhm.
weaponize their tools. Look at how good I am at like trying to
Right.
learn new communication skills here. Look how grandiose and wonderful I am for being invested in my
Right.
relationship more so than my partner. And I think it's hard to see
Yeah.
that in yourself when the reason that you're investing in your relationship and wanting to fix these things is because you really truly do care. But it's easy to slip into that grandiose mindset, that one up mindset.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a good example. And I think sometimes when you say high desire, low desire, like, I mean, in family system therapy, that's talking about homeostasis, keeping a balance, right? And sometimes we swap roles. So if someone's really high desire and they're like, actually, you're not working, I'm leaving, then the other person is like, whoa, now I'm super high desire. And they like swap positions. But yeah, I think I totally agree with you on that. Yeah.
So, what are some other things that we can do to kind of manage this innate fear instinct?
Mm.
Maybe to calm ourselves
So
down a little bit and see the world more
yeah.
clearly.
Yeah, I think so. I practice a lot of acceptance and commitment therapy. The idea behind acceptance and commitment therapy is that instead of trying to make your emotions go away, you learn to get better at feeling. You get better at experiencing these emotions. So, in a relationship, it's normal and natural to feel some anxiety, and it's normal and natural to feel vulnerable and exposed. And the only alternative to that is leaving a relationship. Like some people who leave a relationship, they're going to feel like a lot more relaxed because maintaining a relationship takes work and energy and effort. And so I've seen people say, like, if you feel anxious about a relationship, you should leave. And I'm like, no, 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 no. If you care about something, if it's a good cause, it's going to be hard. It's going to have some discomfort. So I would say, like there are very practical skills called willingness, where you learn to feel your feelings and get good at that. So,
Love that. One of the things that I saw one of your videos recently is uh, you talk about when it comes to managing anxiety, I'm going to do this thing until it makes me a certain level of uncomfortable, and I'm not going to do it if it makes me uncomfortable. And
yeah.
I don't know if I got that right, but can you kind of expand on this idea of confronting our discomfort inside of our relationships and doing things that maybe push us outside our comfort zone, and what it looks like to build up that tolerance or emotional fortitude so that we don't shrink and cower and pull away and retreat every time we feel that anxiety kick in?
Yeah. Yeah. So here's what the number one misunderstanding about anxiety and the most important thing about anxiety, and this is one of my videos that has kind of gone viral. It's got the most number of views, but it's basically when we feel anxious about something, let's imagine it's a dog, right? I feel anxious about a dog. And if uh, I avoid that dog, then my brain and I was safe after avoiding that dog, like, oh, I didn't get bitten. Then my brain is like, oh my gosh, human, good job. The reason you survived that dog, whether it's a Chihuahua or what, is because you escaped, because you ran away. And so, human, the brain says, I'm going to turn your anxiety level up to reinforce that behavior, to make you do that behavior again. So then the next time you see a Chihuahua, you're going to be more anxious about that situation. So long story short, when we avoid something and we survive, which is 99.999% of the time, like if you're still alive, you survived because you like when we avoid something and we survive, your brain makes your anxiety higher. So if we set these rules for ourselves, like, oh, I'm only going to engage in this conversation if it doesn't make me anxious, then your brain's like, oh, I know how to get out of this conversation. I'll make your anxiety go up. And then you get out, right? Oh, I'm only going to do public speaking unless it makes my voice shake. Then your brain's like, oh, I know how to escape public speaking. I'll make your voice shake. And then she'll say no to all public speaking events in the future. But every good thing that you want to do involves some risk. Like that's how life is. Even sitting on the couch involves risk. So you have to choose, am I going to avoid things? Am I going to be alone? Am I going to avoid relationships or always look for the next perfect one? Or am I going to choose to accept that living a life that I value includes discomfort? And for me, like, for example, with my YouTube channel, this last week and a half, my channel's just growing and growing. And all of a sudden, I'm starting to attract more attention than I would like. I never wanted to be a YouTuber. I wanted to help people. And now I'm getting some like attention that's a little uncomfortable for me. And at this point in my practice, I have to choose, well, do I stop helping people or do I take careful action to protect myself while accepting the risk that I can't control? And I have to choose, I'm still going to help people, but that involves risk. That involves risk of me being stressed. That involves risk of, like, as a therapist, right? I have to risk that I might help someone who in the end chooses to end their life. And that's a horrible idea, but the only alternative is not helping people. And so the same thing goes in a marriage. I have to choose that being in a marriage, being with someone who's going to hurt me sometimes. I'm not talking about abuse. I'm not talking about someone beating me. I'm not talking like, please leave an unhealthy relationship, everyone out there. Like if you're in a relationship that's harmful, please, it's okay to walk away. But in an average marriage where you get in arguments or someone doesn't take out the trash or someone forgets to do something, like, got to learn to accept that, and you'll get better and better at feeling vulnerable. You'll get better and better at feeling it's not going to hurt so much.
I love that. Just kind of you're forcing yourself to build a sense of resilience. You know,
Yeah.
I remember the first time I spoke in public.
Mm-hmm.
My parents helped me put together a little like a talk for church, and I was super nervous and anxious, and I had all my notes written on my 3x5 cards, but my parents made me memorize it, and then they took my 3x5 cards away before I got up to speak, and then I got up and I'm like in front of the microphone and I'm shaking, and I wanted my three
Yeah.
by five cards, and my parents were like, "We're not going to give them to you. You can do it." And I got so angry. I like broke down and started crying at the in front of everybody, and like it was just humiliating. And and I you contrast that with, you know, about 2 months ago, right before COVID hit, the September before COVID hit, I spoke in front of an audience of over 3,000 people when I brought John and
Yeah.
Julie Gottman to Utah. And
Yeah.
you know, I was on stage and it didn't even bother me. But between those two moments, there were a lot of moments of me getting up in front of 3 people, 5 people, 10 people, and building up that emotional resilience. And I think a lot of
Mm-hmm.
couples have anxiety around really tough things. You know, whether it's talking about money, whether it's experiencing
Yep.
pleasure, whether it's maybe a
Mm-hmm.
shift in your faith or your partner's faith, their beliefs. It could
Yep.
be how your partner feels about your parents, like in-law issues. There's all these things that can cause anxiety, and the anxiety is a signal that you're reaching your limits. It's not necessarily a signal that things are bad. It's just a signal
Right.
that, hey, we're stretching ourselves here. And so I
Yeah.
love this idea of intentionally exposing yourself to your limits so you can become more emotionally resilient, which allows you to experience more of life.
Yeah. I love that, and that's what I love about your channel. I've listened to some of your stuff, and it's like these are skills that can be learned. Like you can learn how to have a stressful conversation and still feel like and still be connected.
I'm not sure what my camera just kicked off there, but I am back.
Yeah.
Um, awesome. So
Were you able to hear me? Were you able to hear me right just then?
I was totally still
Okay,
with you the whole time.
great.
Um, so I want to talk about, you mentioned habits and rituals are one of the best things that we can do to kind of fortify ourselves and help us lean more to those rose-colored glasses instead of the poop-colored glasses. Are there any specific rituals or habits that you would suggest people start to develop in order to kind of combat that negative bias and help things go right instead of focusing on what's going wrong?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I absolutely. So the first thing to really recognize doesn't have to take a lot of time every day. But like I said, the stressful things take more weight than the pleasant things. And Stephen Covey described this as like the relationship bank account, right? So a 5-to-1 ratio, healthy relationships have a 5-to-1 ratio of like positive interactions to negative interactions. And you have to think about that as like the intensity too. So if I'm gonna have like a really awful intense interaction, then I need to have a lot of really positive, intense interactions. But most of these little things that kind of wear down a marriage, like, oh, you didn't take out the trash, that can be mitigated with noticing or making sure doing. So let me back up just a second. There's a difference. There's different behaviors you can take. There's different behaviors you can take, different things you can practice to build this positive mindset. And some of them are things that you do, and some of them are things that you notice. So when I talk about the 5-to-1 ratio, that's the first thing is you're paying attention to what you're doing. Am I interacting with my husband or my children and taking the time to at least have 5 positive interactions for every one thing that I ask of them? So with my kids, do I read them stories before bed? Do I hug them in the morning? Do I hug them at night? Do I listen to them when they talk to me? Do I drive them to their friends? That's like 5 positive interactions. And then I say, hey, you need to clean the bathroom, right? There's your 5-to-1 ratio. Like, you need to clean the bathroom, let's get it done. And that's how we build up this healthy relationship. And so in a marriage, it looks like, physical affection or noticing them or talking to them or connecting with them or hugging them and just building up that foundation of a good relationship. That's one of the first things.
This is why those love languages work so well. Why
Yeah,
everybody obsesses over love languages, because they like their partner making those little deposits on a regular basis. You know, a compliment
that's right.
here, an acknowledgement there, an act of service here, a date night there, and all those little things
Hmm.
add up over time. So I love that. Be conscious. Be conscious
Hmm.
about doing things that your partner will appreciate and noticing things that will help fill up that love tank. You know, you mentioned a lot of doing
Yep.
things in your example, and I think even something as small as telling your kids like, wow, you did such a great job on that assignment. Or telling your
Yep.
husband, like, hey, I just thank you so much for taking care of that project. It was like really,
Yep.
it was really stressing me out and you just took care of it. And that meant so much to me. Like those little things can be such, oftentimes mean more than what, like buying flowers or planning
Yeah.
a trip to the bowling alley. I don't know. So what else
Yeah.
you got?
Yep. So the 5-to-1 ratio, and that especially, I just want to say one more thing about that. Like when I worked in residential treatment, sometimes we'd have these kids who came in who were like just awful. And so when things awful, they were not awful human beings. Their
Right.
behaviors were really difficult to manage.
Dealing with
And
some
when
tough
we
stuff.
didn't have a relationship with them, we would make a rule with the staff. You're not allowed to correct this child until you've had 5 positive interactions with this child first. And I think if something's going wrong in your relationship, let's say with your husband or your wife, then you say, first, before I say any piece of criticism or request to my husband, husband, will you please do this? I need to first make sure I've had 5 positive interactions today with my husband before I start in on, here's what I need you to do.
I love that.
Are you still with me? I see that your
I,
camera is
I'm still here. I have no
blinking.
idea why my camera's kicking off and on. I apologize. This has never happened before, but we're live and we're just going to deal with it. So my
That's how
audio's
it
not
works,
kicking out,
right?
just
Like,
my video.
great.
Um,
Okay, so do you want to talk about the second one then? Is that
yeah,
what you
yeah,
were
yeah.
Okay, so the next thing that really lays this foundation, other than just these positive day-to-day interactions, is fostering appreciation. And you talk about this in your podcast, and you talk about this in other areas, but this is a skill that can be learned. And these feelings, like how to feel warm and how to feel affectionate towards someone, this is a skill that can be learned. It's not completely out of our control. And one of the best ways to foster this, to build this warm feelings towards someone, is to practice appreciation.
Mm.
And appreciation is a little different than giving thanks. So giving thanks is like, thank you for taking out the trash. And appreciation is, I appreciate you for taking out the trash. It doesn't sound like that, but it sounds like, I appreciate that you're willing to contribute to our family. And that's like a connection thing instead of a transaction thing. Like,
Mm.
thank you for taking out the trash is a transaction, and I appreciate you as a human being. And it's not the words that you say that matter. It's really what's in your heart when you think this. So expressing appreciation is something that really lays this foundation, and saying it out loud can really help. But sometimes, like, I'll be honest, sometimes I have days where I'm like really bugged at my husband, and I'll start compiling this list in my mind of everything he's doing wrong. And when I catch myself doing that, and I know I want to feel differently about my husband, I'll sit down in my journal and I'll start making a list of things that I appreciate about him. I don't need to tell them to him or anything. I'll just start writing it down. And pretty soon I'll realize there's so many things. And by the end of making that list, I feel differently towards my husband. And this is a skill. Like, people don't know this, but this is a skill that you can do to change how you feel about someone. I mean, not 100% of the time. We can't force our feelings, but we can invite our feelings to feel different.
I do the exact same thing. And
Yeah.
and what I'm gathering here is that essentially what you're doing is you're hacking your brain. You
Yeah.
established early on that our brain has a negative bias, but
Hmm.
as you go and then you meet somebody and you're like, I finally feel safe with this person. You take off all your armor, and then your brain goes, wait a second, I'm supposed to keep you safe, and you're taking off your armor. And so
Yeah.
then it goes into like looking for all the things, all the ways that you could get hurt, all the ways that your partner could rip you apart, tear your heart out, do some major damage, anything that will validate that fear thing. And when you start focusing
Mhm.
on gratitude and appreciation, and when you start focusing on serving your partner and having that 5-to-1 ratio of positive to negative interactions, you're subconsciously telling your brain all the reasons that you're safe, all the reasons that this is
Yep.
good, all the reasons that like you chose wisely and your partner's not going to stab you when you take off your armor. And
Yep.
by taking control of that narrative and reinforcing the positive stuff, you offset the negative, and you allow yourself to be more present and less worried about putting that armor back on, so you can
Yep.
just engage in you don't get consumed by that inaccurate negative bias and just operate on a worried wavelength all the time.
Yeah, it's like it. So a lot of this information, I have to credit this book, right? This is like, have you heard of this book, Marcus Warner and Chris Corsi, The 4 Habits of Joy-Filled Marriage? Sorry,
No.
there's a glare. It's a skinny little book,
Yeah.
and it's packed full of stuff like this. But this is, they have summarized this information. This information's all over the place in attachment theory, and John
Yeah.
Gottman talks about this, and Stephen Covey talks about this. But they have boiled it down to like a very condensed package, which I love. But yeah, I mean, we basically are turning on the attachment, the secure attachment in our brain when we practice appreciation. We're basically turning on that safety. And like you talked about, we have to choose between being safe and being connected. And the attachment, the appreciation is kind of like, no, actually, you can do both. You can feel safe and be connected, even when, there's some potential for harm,
I love
even when
this.
you're vulnerable, right?
So the key here
And,
is to
and
focus
there's a few other
on.
ways. Go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry. Go ahead. No, no, no. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go
There's a
ahead.
few other ways to practice appreciation and practice remembering the positive, because our brain is constantly going to naturally default to threats. And we just need to put in some practices to remember the good. So another thing that you can do is just like taking time to talk about the good times that you've had together. Take the time to look at pictures of good times you've had together. So like with parenting, you're like, oh my gosh, parenting is so awful. And then you look at pictures of your kids and you're like, oh my gosh, I love my kids. We did that thing that one time. That was
Yeah.
so cute. That was so fun. But in the middle of it, it's like, oh my gosh, parenting.
Oh yeah,
you
I
know?
totally get that. We have a little 9-month-old baby right now,
Oh
and she
gosh,
woke
yeah.
up this morning at 4:30 screaming her head off and would not go back to sleep. And then
Yeah.
we had a first today. This is totally unrelated, but I think it's funny. I
Yeah.
was in the shower this morning. I just got back from the gym, and my wife was in bed with our baby, trying to calm her down. And she came into the bathroom, and she's like, "Nate, it finally happened." And I'm like, "What happened?" And she's like, "Aurora finally rolled out of bed." You know that I think
Like,
every
fell on
parent
the
has that
floor.
happen at least once, where your kid falls off the
Yep.
bed. And
Yep.
anyway, just those moments where you're like, "I'm a terrible parent. This is really hard. Like, I'm not getting enough sleep." But you're right. If you can offset it by those joyful memories and going through your photo album on your phone and looking at the smiles and the cute baby pictures, it's like, okay, it's worth it. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, so you could even like if you have this situation like where you're like constantly feeling drained by a relationship or you find yourself constantly sucked into negativity, like write yourself out a protocol. Okay, do 5 nice things for someone. Um, Write down 5 things you appreciate about someone. Write down one old memory that you had together that was great. Look at 2 pictures of times together and make this a protocol. Then when you're in the middle of like, oh my gosh, I hate my partner, then you're like, okay, wait. Let's take a deep breath. Let's try this first. Let's build some positivity. And then hopefully, ideally, this isn't like a problem-centered approach. This is like, oh, every day I'm gonna do some of these things. And there's a few more things we can do, but every day I'm gonna show some appreciation. And that's really what lays this foundation for like joy-filled marriage instead of like a let's solve problems marriage, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. I love that. So Emma, how does somebody know when they reach a point where maybe this solutions focused approach on their own isn't working so well and they might need a little bit of outside help? Because you
Yeah.
mentioned that most couples wait till their marriage is a disaster. I think the statistic is most couples wait an average of 6 years after experiencing something that makes them pretty much miserable in their relationship before they seek help. So what are some signs that people might need a little extra help to help them circumvent that 6 year wait?
Yeah. That's a good question. Um the this is I can see why people wait. I can see why people wait because there's a lot of obstacles to getting help, like stigma and shame, and also you're afraid it might make it worse, or the cost. Like up until about a year ago, I couldn't afford to go to therapy. It was not in our budget for us to do therapy, and so I can see why people don't get help. But there are a lot of good resources, like your podcast and like John Gottman Marriage Minute and like the app Lasting. Like there's a lot of good resources. Like
And like
the first,
your YouTube channel, let's do a shameless plug
yeah.
for that too.
Oh, right, that's true, right? I have a YouTube channel, by the way. It's mostly anxiety focused, but I do have some good relationship stuff on there too. And so there's a lot of good resources that can help. But if you're really like constantly feeling like overwhelmed, stressed out, or like you just there's these problems that keep coming up, but you don't have the tools to solve them. Like every time you talk about money, one of you ends up throwing a fit, or every time you talk about money, someone ends up bawling and like crying and super upset. Like if you keep trying to solve a problem and you keep trying, but you keep doing the same thing over and over again, that to me is a sign. It's like, oh, let's learn a new skill, or let's get some support, or let's add some resources so that we
Love it.
can move past this. And like you, I really believe in growth. Like I believe we have this immense capacity for growth, but most of us don't know what skill it is we need next to get past the current obstacle we're at. But I mean, so that's all really general. Obviously, if you're arguing a lot, if you're fighting a lot, if you don't feel safe and you don't know how to fix things, which I think a lot of us are there. I mean, like
Yeah.
that's a normal experience. Like marriages are so hard. I don't know. Maybe some people's marriages aren't.
Yeah. In my experience,
I just don't know anyone like that. Sorry. Yeah.
no, I think you're right. Just from my experience, I think most people get married because the person that they fell in love with makes them feel really good, and they think, oh, if I
Yeah.
just attach myself to this person for the rest of my life, I'm always going to feel really good. But nobody
Yeah.
gives them the blueprint. Nobody gives them, hey, here's the game plan. Like these are the things that you need to do in order to keep this feeling alive, to stay safe, to stay connected, to make sure that your partner stays invested and makes you feel understood, and that you can
Yeah.
tackle things together as a partnership. And most of us just wing it. You
Yep.
know, I think a lot of people, their game plan for an awesome relationship is hope.
Right.
Hope and waiting problems out. Like, well, maybe if I wait a couple months, things will get better. Maybe if I wait a couple months, I'll heal. Maybe if I wait a couple
Yep.
months, my partner will change, or they'll wake up and decide to invest in the relationship. And hope and waiting are not good strategies. Good strategies are what
Yeah.
you've said, like learn skills, seek out help,
Hmm.
read a book, listen to a
Yep.
podcast, and then put what you learn into to action. And yeah, so I do think that most couples at least go through a cycle or a point where they're like, wow, this isn't working for us, and we need to figure this out because nobody ever taught us how to do this. So
Yeah, I think in my experience, most people do. Like, I, I saw this shirt the other day that says, "Keep talking, I'm diagnosing you," and I thought, well, I thought that's kind of funny. That's kind of accurate because when I talk to people, I do hear, but I'm never ever thinking like, "Oh, you're a broken person," but
right,
I'm a fixed person. I'm constantly, like, the more I get to know people, the more I realize we all have stuff, but there's the people who talk about it and there's the people who don't,
yeah,
and that's the
agreed.
difference. Even as like a member of a church, it's easy to think, oh, i'm the only one who's uh I'm the only one who's really got a problem with this. Everyone else, like a sin or something, right? Everyone else has got this figured out. And oh, I just have to say this. There's a family member in my ward, and the husband is in the church leadership. They just wrote a book together about his affair, about his sexual addiction. He's in our bishopric, and the book talks about how he, and it goes into detail. It's a semi-fictional account, but when I read the book and realized it was a truthful account, I was like, oh my gosh, you are the most brave, vulnerable human being to say, hey, we're real good, trying, caring human beings, and
Who are dealing with something
we
really
have
big.
stuff.
Wow.
We have stuff.
Yeah, we all have stuff.
Yeah. Anyway, so we all have stuff. We all need help. So there shouldn't be shame, but I can see why there's obstacles. So, like, get help sooner.
Yeah, one of
I
my
don't know.
one of my favorite quotes is by Carl Jung, and he says something to the extent of, "The treasure you seek is in the cave you fear to enter." And
Yeah.
a lot of us stand outside that cave, and it's really scary. There might be a dragon in there, but the longer you
Yeah.
wait, the bigger and scarier the dragon gets, and the harder he becomes to defeat. And if we just can learn to deal with our issues head on, like our personal issues, uh, then I think we find some really amazing breakthroughs. And this is, I think,
Yeah.
at what you talked about today is at the very core of that. It's, we're afraid. That's part of how our
Yeah.
brain is programmed to keep us alive, is that we live in a state of fear. And if we
Yeah.
want to live in a state of peace and comfort and connection with our partner, we have to learn to offset that. And we have to acknowledge that that fear is there, and try and figure out where it comes from, and learn to not feed it so much. And I think that's a really powerful message. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, is it okay if I share a couple other things that might be
I'd
helpful,
love
like a
that.
quick list of things that like help lay this foundation? Because when we look at this, it's really about kind of building rituals that lay this steady and constant foundation in relationships. One of them is physical touch and eye contact. Because again, we're talking about attachment here. We're talking about secure attachment bonds. So a hug, a long hug, an 8-second hug, these things help build that secure attachment. And then eye contact too. I've noticed when I'm feeling ashamed or when I'm feeling insecure in my relationship, that I won't look my husband in the eyes. And I found that when I take the time to look in his eyes, it's a little vulnerable, and then we connect. And there's something really powerful about that. And you look at the attachment research, and eye contact is how the attachment bond is one way the attachment bond is formed. So again, like, so in addition to, appreciation, a 5-to-1 ratio, and looking at happy memories, there's also like physical touch and eye contact. And then in addition to appreciation, gratitude, right? Actually saying out loud, thank you. Appreciation is something you can do inside of you. Gratitude is something that's outside of you. And with our mind, I'm like fire hosing it at this point, but like with our
Do.
mind, what we pay attention to, we get more of. So if I pay attention to what's nerve wracking or what's scary or what's insecure or what I don't like about my husband, I will get more of that. And if I pay attention to what I like and what I enjoy and what I appreciate, you will get more of that. And your brain lays down actual more physical neural pathways about the things you pay attention to. So people who spend more time in gratitude have thicker neural highways to feel gratitude. They're better, actually better at feeling gratitude. So what you practice, you get more of.
Yes.
So
I think
yes, and then
if anybody
yeah, go ahead.
listening right now is like, "Oh, man, what's one thing that I can do to just like focus on for the next couple of weeks that will radically change my relationship for the better?" That one thing, if that's all you did was think,
Yep.
what am I focusing on? The positive or the negative? What am I focusing
Mhm.
on? Am I being critical or am I appreciating? Am I being
Mhm.
grateful? If you just asked yourself that question a couple of times a day for the next like 3 to 4 weeks, I guarantee you your relationship will feel completely different in a good way than how it feels right now.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a
Yep.
powerful, powerful principle I don't want to gloss over.
And sometimes for me, it's hard to remember that. So I print out these little charts for myself that have a month on them, and then I put these teeny little tasks on them. And it says something like hug Ryan, that's my husband, read 2 children, like take my vitamins, like super teeny tasks. And then I try and get 30 in a row. And it could be something like write gratitude, say prayer, like whatever. And so it's just like I just have this chart and I try and get 30 days in a row where I hug my husband, 30 days in a row where I express gratitude one time that day. And
Yes.
it does, like within a month, it like it changes how you feel. And even as a marriage and family therapist, like I definitely go through moments where I'm like, it can be hard to love your spouse sometimes, you know. If he was sitting here, he'd be laughing. I wish, you know, but
Yeah, we're not
because it's
always
probably
all the most lovable creatures all the time. Our partners, they're
yeah,
the people we love the most, and the people that drive
yeah,
us the most nuts at the same time. Totally get that.
yeah.
And I love this idea of, so I have this thing called a marriage scorecard, and it's very
Mhm.
similar to what you're talking about. And the whole idea behind it is do the small things that make a big difference. It's
Yeah,
the consistency that makes a big difference in your relationships. Consistently making yourself and your partner feel safe, making your partner and yourself feel seen, feel loved, feel
yep,
accepted, feel validated. And those little things, whether it's a hug or a compliment or a passionate kiss or an act of service, those things add up over time and make a massive,
yep,
massive difference.
totally.
I love that.
Okay, can I share two more things from
Yes,
these are
yes.
straight from that book I mentioned. One of them is, and you talked about it, right? So some of these other things I'm skipping over, right? 5 love languages, time together, right? Just connecting before bed, helping people feel safe and cared about. And then another one is like playing together, laughing together. What
Mm,
brings you joy together? Like, so instead of like, oh, I'm having a problem in my relationship, first thing I'm going to do is tell my husband what's wrong. Instead, say, okay, I'm having a problem in my relationship. First thing I want to do, go watch something funny and go for a hike with my husband. And then I'm going to hug him. And then the next day, we're going to do something really positive, and then I'm going to bring it up and see if we can fix it, right? Or see if
yeah.
there's something we can shift. But that, like laughing your head off together, that's really good. The other thing this book mentions is taking time for relational sex. So there's like performance-based sex where you want to make someone else feel good, or you want to look good, or you want to perform in a certain way. And then there's relational sex, which is where you are spending time. And maybe this is more, I mean, the authors of this book are men, and I don't know how this relates to men and women's different experiences of sex. I do not specialize in sex therapy, but I know the difference in this feeling with relational sex, where you spend time cuddling and you
Yeah.
look in each other's eyes and you spend time expressing appreciation and you move in a way that's like, I appreciate you and this human body your soul is stored in, and I love you as a whole. And that's a different, relational sex feels different. And it's not saying that, you know, you can't have performance sex too sometimes, but it's just like these are things that build that foundation.
I love that. Those are all amazing tips. Okay, I have one question before. I know you have to get out of here pretty quick.
I
But
can go I can go a few minutes over. It's just a staff meeting. I
we
mean,
have, well, I still want to respect your time.
that's good.
Joni just commented it on YouTube, and she said that her biggest problem is when she tries to apply these skills when a fight's about to happen. Her fight or flight mode kicks in, and you start to get like really emotional. That fear kicks into overdrive. What do you do other than maybe shutting down and getting really sad, or escalating and getting really aggressive? What can you do to prevent those negative interactions from happening, and stay focused on the solutions instead of the problems when our emotions start to escalate and conflict starts to kind of trickle in?
That is such a great question. And I have to go back to John Gottman, the preeminent marriage researcher, and his research on flooding. So I would say go check out John Gottman's blog on flooding. And I bet you have a video on it too,
Yep.
or a podcast on it too. But flooding is where when your brain perceives a threat, like, oh, I'm going to get in a fight with my husband, your brain shuts down the thinking part of your brain and reverts to the animal part of your brain that thinks I have to run away from a tiger. And it just like sends all this blood to your big muscles and your hands get sweaty and you stop thinking clearly and then you say stuff that you regret. So it's great that Joni was able to recognize this in herself. And if, whenever possible, you get really good at recognizing this fight, flight, freeze response or this flooding response, you get good. What are my red flags? What do I start thinking? What do I start saying? And then almost no problems get solved when we're in this state. I would say every once in a while, we have to get into this state to face our scariest stuff. But most of the time, nothing gets solved in this state. So John Gottman and his researchers, they did some really interesting experiments. You should check them out, where they paused people in the middle of an argument, had them do something completely different, had them calm down, and then come back to the argument again when they're calm, and then face the argument from a calm perspective. So that looks like going for a walk, doing some coping skills, doing something soothing, and then coming back to face the situation. But then the problem comes up, like, well, what if every time we come back to this situation, we get right back into fight, flight, freeze? We get right back into this fight reaction. Then that's when you definitely need to add some extra resources. So doing it with a third party, right? Having this argument with a therapist there, that therapist is going to help you walk through it. Have this argument with two friends who can support you. Have this, and when I say argument, I mean, ideally, we're trying to problem solve in a calm way. There's other ways to slow yourself down if you can't see a therapist, or if you are, for some reason unable to get that third party support, because really a therapist is going to teach you the skills so that you can solve that problem without fighting. They're going to teach you about the four horsemen. They're going to teach you communication skills that are going to help you solve that problem without needing to fight about it. But if you can't do that, there's some other ways to slow yourself down. So let's say, oh, I know me and my husband are going to fight about money. I can feel my blood just pumping and getting hot. I'm going to take a break. I'm going to go for a walk. Then we're going to come back and we're going to get a notebook. And I'm going to write down my concern in this notebook. Hey, you spent too much money at the restaurant. And then I'm going to pass that notebook to my husband. And I'm not going to say anything. And my husband's going to read this. And maybe my husband's going to need to go for a walk before he replies. And then he's going to reply and write it in the notebook and then pass it back across the table. And that slows it down so that you don't get into this fight. And there's other ways to do this too. Like for some couples, if they go to Starbucks to have this conversation, they'll keep their voices low.
Yeah.
Now, for other couples, that's not a good option, right? Like there'll be like get arrested at Starbucks or something like that. It's not a good option. But like anything you can do to slow that process down,
yeah,
to ground yourself and to calm yourself can help. And then learn the skills to fight fair, to work through a problem in a caring way. So go to a therapist, right?
Yeah, that's a great solution. Practice calming down. I love it. And just one little thing to punctuate there is it's very rarely can you calm down if you stay in the conversation. So I think if you're starting to feel emotionally flooded, overwhelmed, your heart rate's increasing, and all that stuff that Emma just talked about is happening to you, moving forward with the conversation and continuing to talk about the subject that's making you feel stressed and anxious is not a good idea. Like you need to be able to just in that moment be like, hey, this isn't going in a positive direction. We need to take a break and come back and revisit this. So,
and that last thing you said, that's the difference between couples that stay together and those who don't, is you said, and we need to come back to this, right? So if when we get flooded, we're like, we just need to take a break. I can't talk about this right now. But then we don't come back to it until the next time there's a blow up, and then it blows up and they say, we need to take a break. I'm not going to talk about this right now. That's how you get to really cold couples, detached emotionally couples. So we got to say, we will come back to this in 20 minutes when I'm calm. We will come back to this in our therapy session. We will come back to this in one day. We got to come back. You can't just stay in avoidance.
Yeah, those couples start putting their armor back on, right?
Right.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Emma, you are a wonderful guest. You're, in my estimation, a brilliant educator and therapist, and I really appreciate you sharing your time with me today and creeping into your staff meeting a little bit. Is there, if people want to learn more about you, where do you want them to go check you out?
Yeah, I have my YouTube channel is the best place. It's called Therapy in a Nutshell. I also have, my website is therapynutshell.com. no Ina, right in the middle, just therapynutshell.com. And I do have a relationship skills course that's, less than the cost of a therapy session, that is like a 30-day, 30 skills course if people want to learn some of these really basic relationship skills.
Very cool. I'll make sure to link to those down in the description. And then don't jump off. I'll end the recording and have a little chat with you afterwards. But I just want to let everybody else know that I do have another. So, one of the things that Emma brought up several times in this conversation is attachment theory. And I did an amazing interview series with Kyle Benson on attachment styles and knowing the difference between anxious attachment and avoidant attachment. And I'll make sure to link that up here somewhere on the screen for those of you who are watching the recording. Thank you for tuning in and for being with us here on this. I don't know how long we went, about an hour, talking about how to make things go right in your marriage. And super grateful to have Emma be a part of this as well. Bye, guys.